Hi everyone, welcome to the first part of my Halo Reach Spartan build series. In this one, I'll be going over the leg armor. So basing off the proportions and the color scheme from the Master Chief Collection version of the armor, Infinite is slightly different with some of the sizing, but this is where I'm going to be basing a lot of my color scheme with the gray, the black, and some of the red tones it has on it. So for the scaling, to start off the prints, I put a lot of these on the Armorsmith, which is a program I use for scaling. It takes time to get set up for your own body measurements, but it's something I would recommend. So I'll put that in the description for those who are looking into it. But you can see here I put the knee pads, the thighs, and the shins, mirrored them over so I could get an idea how it was. And then from there I started printing. So each part took roughly 2 days to print. From here you could see the shins were 2 days and 10 hours. The only exception to this was the knee pads, which only took 7 hours for the two of them. And here luckily there was no print failures, but I did have quite a few with the thigh pieces. So after the prints, the more labor intensive part of every build is going to be the sanding and the paint priming, which in this case, like my other videos, I am prepping it for the primer. I believe this time is 80 grit sandpaper since it was such a large print, wanting to smooth everything down. Because this time, instead of trying to apply Bondo spot putty with just my finger, I was going to try to thin it down with acetone and apply it with a brush, since it would turn the spot putty into more of a paint application versus a toothpaste, which in the past videos you could see that although it was easy to sand off when I applied it when it was a paste, it did accumulate a lot of dust. The way I saw it, it was wasted material because I had to sand off so much. And with this being a large piece, I wanted to see if it would speed up the process and help me out so I could do this on the rest of the pieces, like the chest, the arms, the back, and so forth. So after all that dried, I went ahead and sanded with 140 grit this time, since the Bondo was a lot finer and not had as much imperfections as when it was applied with the paste. Since this one ran like water, a lot of it was already pretty smooth and it just needed to get sanded afterward for the base coat of primer and paint. Same thing as last video, I'm gonna be using the filler primer, and I don't believe I showed it here, but I put 2 coats of this, and you could see with doing the acetone and Bondo method, the filler primer does level a lot better than before, where I want to say in Carter's helmet I did a few months back, I had to go back and sand it a couple times just with the amount of lines that were showing through. And with this one, the filler primer just applied a whole lot better than in the past couple videos I've done. I forgot to get the footage of me sanding the filler primer, but I did that with 140 grit on that detail sander, and with that finish I was able to start doing the base coat of the dark gray I bought, and it came with a gloss finish, which I would have preferred something a bit duller, since here you could see some of the imperfections the prints have, which is fine because later in the video you'll see I'll do some more of the detail markings with a brush, and later on in a future video I'll probably weather down this part of the armor even more. And since the gray was covering so well, all I did was the 2 coats and it came out pretty good. So the rest of this footage is just going to show me painting the other pieces. I'll put a timestamp in the bottom here so you could forward to in case you want to skip this part and see a bit more of the detail work. Alright, so for the masking on the detailing, all I did was take screenshots from the footage here, and in game you could see the shins have a lot of like dirt and grime, which I'll probably would be adding later on for more weathering. Here I'm just focused on the black parts, which you could see on the shins, and some of the other accents on the side of the thigh pieces. So using tape, I'm just pressing the corners in to not have any bleed through and cutting any excess off with the X-Acto knife. This process is pretty straightforward in case you're doing it yourselves. I would just make sure you're careful you don't dig into the paint itself. On some parts, gray paint and primer was getting scratched off because the edge of the razor. Luckily those parts are getting covered with black paint, so it wasn't all that of an issue. But in case for whatever reason you scratched the main body of your armor or your project, you may have to go back and touch it up with reapplying the paint or spray painting. So after masking each part out, I would go ahead and sand those portions with 200 grit sandpaper, just lightly enough so when I go ahead and paint it over, as I do here with the black acrylic, it sticks on a lot better and there's no chance of it peeling off, since the other parts with the gray have a gloss finish. It being scuffed up would make sure that it doesn't come up in case I were to rough it up later on or when I do end up weathering it. And luckily with this being black accents versus a lighter color like white, this covered pretty quick. So this is just the first coat going on and you could see how well it's covering. And this is in a satin finish, so it's not as glossy as the gray base coat, but it's covering well. And although it looks good with just one coat, I'm gonna go ahead and do a second pass later on, which you can see here. And it being summer heat, it dries quickly, so I don't really have to worry about waiting a couple hours for it to dry like I had to do with the spray paint to make sure it wasn't just tacky. So taking off the tape is actually one of the more satisfying parts after painting. One thing I would do for this too is make sure you try taking off the tape at a bit of an angle so as to not peel up any paint on the edges that may have layered overdoing those multiple coats. So for the knee pads, I had another issue I was trying to fix. So these Velcro pads I have here had a fabric adhesive, at least it said on the packaging, and opposite side had another adhesive which I put to the back of the knee pads. And although it did stick to the knee pads good, just with how rough it was, the ones that were getting applied to the pants kept coming off with just the amount of lint it was picking up. And even with the one on the right, when I used a lint remover, it was just coming off pretty easy after a couple of steps of walking. But you could see here the placement of the knee pads, it did attach well for the positioning. It was just trying to find an alternative for a better strapping to the knees themselves. And in doing so, I ended up finding this super glue for fabric, and I wanted to see how well it worked for pants, since this is my first time using it and trying to get a suit together, and putting it with these larger Velcro straps through the whole knee versus just using a square. And I wanted to find it in black too, so it wasn't as noticeable going through the whole knee, and I could reposition it if needed, if I had put one too high or too low. So taking the Velcro pads out of the box, I cut it in half so it would be more rectangular versus that square, and applied a bead of the fabric glue onto the pants through one slot you can see here, and then applied the strap onto it. And it has its own adhesive, but with having issues with the previous one, I just wanted to make sure it stuck. I did the same thing for the other side. You could see applying the bead of glue, putting it throughout the whole section. I'm going to be putting the strap, applying the Velcro straps soon after. And these pants I got through Amazon. I'll put a link in the description. And they're like a tactical pants for airsoft, but they have knee pads that come with them. The knee pads obviously don't look like the suit, so I made sure to remove those and not have them on, and in its place put the straps for the knee pads. So with everything finished for the legs, the paint, the detailing, the straps. This is the first test after all of that, and you can see here the way I'm attaching it is by a loop that comes from the thigh pieces up to where my belt goes, and the belt goes through each loop like it does for pants, but in this case it goes through the thigh and is able to hold it in place, so when I'm walking around or have any kind of movement, it stays attached at the right height as to not sag. And here you saw the strap that attaches from the rear of the thigh to the back of the shins, and it's just a 2-inch nylon strap that is fastened to 2 buckles, one on each part, so one in the thigh, one in the shin, and those were super glued and held in place for about a day or two just to make sure it cured and was secured to be able to hold the weight of the shin while walking around or just having any general movement. And with that, you can see the knee pads attached pretty well with the Velcro, they hold in place. And moving around, the suit is pretty bulky, putting it on yourself, but with the straps holding it in place, it does hold pretty good. Later on, as I continue with the suit, I may add padding within the thigh as well as in the shin just for better hold. But yeah, that's about it for now on the legs. Thanks for those who made it this far in the video, and for those tagging along in this whole series. It is taking a bit longer than I thought, so thanks again for the patience on waiting for this to come out this last few months. Hope you guys stick along for the next part. I'll update on what's next to come, whether it be a helmet or the next piece. But yeah, just let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I'll see you in the next build.